Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field with the Packers back from their bye week and looking ahead to a Sunday afternoon matchup against the Denver Broncos on the road. I will start by apologizing for my voice if it sounds a little off. I am slightly under the weather, but I don't feel as bad as I sound. I'm actually feeling pretty good.
I don't think you sound bad, though.
Okay.
I think you sound like gritty.
You're saying I need to bring this voice to the show more often.
Well, I mean, the type of voice like that, you walk in a bar, everybody starts looking at you. You know, I mean, like
you command the room.
Yeah,
Is that
you
what
command
you're
the
saying?
room. No, I like it. I think
All
it's
right.
You're made for this. But
All
I
right.
appreciate you toughing it out.
I'll work on it. I'll try to replicate some other time. Before we get to talking about some issues with the Packers, though, Wes, I have to mention this because on our last show, before we took our little break heading into the bye weekend, I brought up, or at least raised the question as to whether we were just headed for another NFC Championship rematch between the Eagles and the 49ers, the way those two teams are playing, the way they were dominating. And lo and behold, what happens right after we discuss that possibility? A couple of backup quarterbacks with outstanding defenses behind them pull off the upsets, and the Browns knock off the Niners, the Jets knock off the Eagles. No one in the NFL in 2023 now is unbeaten. And the Eagles and 49ers may still meet again for the NFC Championship, but it just goes to show you that that it's a long season. Any given Sunday, all those cliches. It's a week-to-week league, and that was quite an interesting week of NFL football, even though the Packers were not participating.
And the spot for jinx is real. So, I mean, that's the other thing we learned this weekend.
All right.
Hey, listen, so I had an amazing opportunity. This actually was the first weekend I ever sat down and watched football with my son, which was a lot of fun.
There you
right?
go.
I watched Vikings and Bears. I watched Lions in Tampa Bay. I obviously saw the matchup you talked about with the 49ers and Browns, Eagles, all these games. But what was the most interesting to me is you talk about teams that are considered like the leaders, the front runners. Unfortunately, they've also developed these patterns. And for San Francisco, they were done in by what has ultimately been one of the things that has stopped them from becoming a Super Bowl championship team, and that's injuries. Trent Williams goes out of that game, returns, but still gets banged up. Christian McCaffrey gets dinged up at the end of the game. Deebo Samuel obviously has the shoulder injury, ends up costing me my fantasy game this week. We won't go into that, though.
Please.
But when you're playing a team like Cleveland that is as game as they are defensively.
Wow, yeah.
The Browns' defense is one of the more underrated units in the league, considering how prolific they've actually been here as of late. And then the Jets, man, I just don't know what else you can say. 4 takeaways. They won that game for their team, but they also did it by beating a 5-0 football team who's known for their offense, explosion here, the last couple seasons. The Jets are for real. And unfortunately for them, the Aaron Rodgers injury happened, but my goodness, I mean, that defense is going to keep them in a lot of ball games.
Well, there's a lot of stirring going on in New York now because there was the video of Aaron Rodgers casually playing catch and whatnot. He's already off the crutches after the Achilles surgery, and Robert Saleh made the comment that Aaron Rodgers is on a mission. Obviously, the Jets' mission, if they can somehow get Aaron Rodgers back before the end of the season, their mission is to still be in the hunt somehow, because then they feel like they will really have a shot. And you mentioned the Cleveland Browns. I did not realize this until I saw this statistic on Sunday night, and I actually put it in Monday morning's Insider Inbox when I was working on the column. The Cleveland Browns have allowed 1,002 total yards through 5 games, which is like the third fewest yards allowed through 5 games, like all time, like ever in the NFL. And it's the fewest allowed through 5 games since like 1971 or something like that, over 50 years. What the Cleveland Browns are doing on defense, I tell you, I mean, it was a weekend, I thought, for the most part, not in every instant, but for the most part, a weekend that was ruled by defenses in the NFL. We saw I mean, and this is how backup quarterbacks can get surprise victories, so to speak, right? Can get upset victories is when defenses find a way to take over games, and then it sort of becomes anything goes down the stretch. The 49ers still have a chance to kick a field goal and win the game, but they miss it. The Eagles still get the ball back at the end with a chance, right? But the fourth down pass deep down the field, double coverage gets knocked away. There's going to be a lot of interesting activity here now that nobody's undefeated, and the Lions are 5-1 now, sitting atop the NFC. Analysts are asking, are the Lions maybe the best team in the NFC? I don't know if I'd go quite that far just yet, because up until last Sunday, the Eagles and the 49ers looked like they were in, on another level, so to speak.
Yeah.
But take nothing away from the Lions. They went down to Tampa Bay and only gave up a couple of field goals to Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers, and they lost their number one running back to an injury, and they didn't seem to miss a beat offensively either.
13-3 now, the best record in the NFL over the last 16 games. The way they finished last season and then being able to carry that momentum into this year, it's been really impressive to watch. Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown have developed a chemistry there that I think quarterbacks and receivers always look to achieve. I mean, you're seeing the big play potential now that Jamison Williams is back. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be thrown into the fire potentially here. He's been dealing with some of his own injuries, but if they're going to lose David Montgomery for a minute, that's the adjustment that's going to have to be made. But Mike, I said it at the end of last year, and I said it in that regular season finale against the Packers. Detroit's defense statistically was not very good last year, but they made a change in the second half of that season. They got better towards the end of that season, and they've just continued to get better. So now you're actually starting to see the statistics line up with the way that they perform. And in every single way of that game, they dictated what Baker Mayfield could do, in addition to the fact that Tampa Bay doesn't have a run game. They've really struggled on the ground, but they didn't allow Baker to pull off his magic to find a way to win that game. I just thought when you look at Detroit and what constitutes being a good team, a double-digit win team, a 12-win team, they played that style of football in this thing because they beat them in all three phases.
Yeah, and the efficiency that we started to see the second half of last season from Jared Goff with Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator in Detroit, not a fluke by any means, because Jared Goff is continuing to be that efficient quarterback, and I would argue, losing Montgomery and with what Goff did, I mean, I believe it was 44 pass attempts against the Buccaneers, but yet they held a 13-minute advantage in time of possession. It was pure ball control passing, and yeah, the Lions didn't light up the scoreboard, but in not lighting up the scoreboard, they still completely controlled and dominated that game, quite frankly, on both sides of the ball. So,
and those are the games, by the way, that Tampa's won this year. That's how they got to 3-1. They've won these scrappy games, and the Detroit Lions just completely took that away.
Yeah, well, those are the teams at the top of the NFC. Those are the teams that the Packers are chasing. The Packers will enter this Sunday's game at Denver with a 2-3 mark, a 2-game losing streak, unfortunately, heading into the bye week. Now the Packers are coming out of that, and I'm just going to throw this as an open-ended question at you, Wes. When you look at everything that's happened over the first 5 games here for the Packers, now you're coming out of the bye. You've got 12 straight here before the end of the regular season. What is I guess I would say the biggest area or the top of mind thing for you that you feel the Packers need to improve upon in order to get things going back in the right direction?
Win the first quarter. And you need to play a complete game in order to win the game. But if you don't come out of the gates, these teams are so talented, Mike, and there's so much parity in this league. You can't spot an opponent, the first 400 meters of a 3,200 meter run.
Right.
You have to be able to keep pace, if nothing else, and that's where Green Bay's really struggled. I mean, I raised the point in Insider Inbox. One of the only things that Denver's actually done pretty well up until last week against Kansas City was they put points on the board in the first quarter. They actually are outscoring teams 41-31 in the first quarter. And that's not because they had like 24 points in one first quarter. No, it was just consistently putting up 7 to 14 points. The problem for Denver is they're the opposite of Green Bay in that they have 10 points in the third quarter. They just have not been able to sustain that throughout games. They've had injuries and turnovers kind of haunt them. For Green Bay's standpoint, they've been one of the more productive teams in the National Football League in the second half, particularly that third quarter. But it's making sure you don't dig that hole early on. So how do you stop that? It comes back to sustaining drives offensively. It comes back to that initial first down. You go back to that opener against Chicago. It wasn't perfect. They got the ball at midfield because of a gutsy play by the Bears.
Yeah.
But it was how they took what basically was almost a turnover type play and produced points off of it. That's one thing Green Bay for the last month has just really struggled to do. They have to find ways to come out of the gates and sustain a drive.
Yeah, the starts have certainly been one of the most, if not the most concerning issue for the Packers. And this is the way I look at it. And I think I'm saying the same thing you are, but maybe with slightly different language, because
maybe a little deeper voice.
You know how I am. You know how I am with regard to crunch time and how much that matters in this league. You know, making the plays when you've got to make them in the fourth quarter, late in games when things are tight. And I'll talk about a few more of those later on as well. So you can't win a game. You can't win a game, generally speaking, with a fast start in the NFL. But as you talked about, if you can come out of the gates with some production and at least keep pace, you get off to a decent start in a game, it just increases your margin for error the rest of the way. What we've seen with the Packers, because they've gotten off to such slow starts, is then you get into the second half, you're in comeback mode, and your margin for error is almost nil. You can't make a mistake on offense where you cross midfield and then throw an interception because you're just too far behind. You haven't made enough good things happen. The defense gets in a position where it can't allow one scoring drive, in the second half because the offense is too far behind. So a stronger start will increase this team's margin for error because these games are not going to go perfectly, and I know we talk about the youth a lot and all of that, and the Packers are still working through a lot of that, but those things are going to continue to come up where it's not always going to look smooth, it's not always going to look perfect. But if you can put yourself in a position where you have a little bit more of a margin for error, then you have a chance at crunch time to make the plays that you need to make.
Let's even go back to that Detroit game against Green Bay, because this is also probably feeds into what Packers need to do a little bit better down these last 12 games. Green Bay did a really good job against David Montgomery in that game for the most part. But they kept going back to Montgomery over and over and over again. They created some second and short opportunities, some third and short opportunities, and then later on in that fourth quarter, when he was starting to get up to 25, 26, 27 touches, that's when things started to rupture a little bit more. Green Bay has really struggled to generate those plays offensively. You look at the time of possession. I threw this stat in Insider Inbox too. In Matt LaFleur's first 4 years as Packers head coach, win or lose, playoffs or not, NFC championship game or not making the playoffs, they've been a top 5 team in time of possession. Time of possession isn't a be-all, end-all stat. I will always say that. But it is an indication of overall efficiency. Yeah. Green Bay right now, I believe, is in 28th or 29th. They just haven't won that phase, and it's because of not sustaining drives. It's because of some of the things that have happened defensively. Green Bay needs to get back to the sort of the roots of this offense and what they do well. Because win or lose, that was what they always kind of were able to hang their hat on, is that we're going to make you play defense. We're going to make guys go out there and have to give energy every single time. We're going to give our defense time to rest on the other side of things. Green Bay struggled to find that. I think that partially has to do with some of the issues with the run game, but it also comes down to the situational football elements that Green Bay struggled with. Not so much in the red area like last year, but in some of the early down stuff. Yeah, and what you said, too, about sustaining drives, I mean, where I go with that as well is a couple of things, and Matt LaFleur's talked about a lot in terms of the Packers have to avoid the negative plays, and whether that's, we saw, like against New Orleans, it was a lot of penalties, and some other games it's been tackles for loss, or in the case of the Raiders game, there were the sacks and what Max Crosby was doing in the offensive backfield and all that. You're not going to be able to eliminate them, but you have to cut down on those negative plays that are putting you behind the chains and making it difficult to sustain those drives. But then the other thing I will say, and this really goes for both sides of the ball, is you have to make the plays that are there. When you look at, why are the Packers 2-3 right now? Because all these games, certainly the close ones, they always hinge on a couple of plays here or there.
You look at the Atlanta game, and there were a couple interceptions that were in guys' hands that were dropped. There was a 3rd and 1 on offense where the hole was there and it wasn't converted. Right before the final interception against the Raiders on that last drive, a couple of drop passes that could have moved the chains and put the offense in a better position. Those are all plays that are there to be made, and you have to make them. When you're the team that makes them, your odds of winning go way up. When you let those opportunities get away, things shift, to the opponent, and their chances are the ones that rise. So the plays have been there for the Packers, and not to say that making those plays was going to guarantee some sort of a victory, but boy, their chances of winning those games were going to go up dramatically. And I think if they just make more of those plays that are there, they put themselves in better positions.
Since you and I are just Monday morning quarterbacks now that just sit around and watch football on the weekends, did you get a chance to watch Chargers and Cowboys?
I actually watched most of the game Monday night. Yeah.
So, a perfect example of that, because it's not just about Green Bay, it's what other teams do, and it's the difference between a win and a loss sometimes.
Yeah.
I think about that play. Keenan Allen played a great game on Monday night, excuse me. He completely broke, I believe it's Blank, the cornerback from the Cowboys, completely broke his ankles, right? Beat him with a double move. The guy didn't just get lost on the play, he actually fell down.
Yeah.
And he's going up the sideline there. Justin Herbert kind of airmails the pass, just overthrows him, just standing in the pocket, not running or anything, just overthrows him. It ends up, Allen reaches out for it. Probably, at the very least, if he beats the safety, it's going to be a touchdown. But at the very least, it's going to be an explosive play, probably 20, 25 yards. Allen misses them. You think about the difficulties that LA had trying to move the ball against that Dallas defense. If you hit that explosive, difference in the ball game. Conversely,
100%.
Cowboys have probably one of their worst play calls. No disrespect to Mike McCarthy, but probably one of their worst play calls of the entire game. Play is completely falling apart. They're trying to run like the screen game or something. Dak is under pressure. He fires off this pass to Tony Pollard. Pollard makes one cornerback miss and takes it up the field for 60 yards or whatever. That's the difference. When you execute in areas of the game where you're not supposed to execute, and you don't make the plays that are there to be made.
Yeah, the missed tackle on the dump-off pass to Pollard maybe was the biggest play in 100%. The entire game. Yeah. I mean, it
might be a 4-yard gain otherwise.
Yeah, it turned a modest gain into an explosive play that completely changed things. Again, it's another example of the plays that are there. It doesn't take anything magic. It doesn't take anything Herculean to make it happen. When it's there, when it's right in front of you, you got to make it. Yeah. And I think the Packers have had those opportunities, and I think they can. I think they'll have the ability to generate more of those opportunities as these young players on offense continue to grow. The other thing I will say too, we don't really know exactly where the Packers are health-wise right now. They were back for a post-bye week practice on Monday. Aaron Jones and Darnell Savage having missed/exited the previous game. They were back on the practice field. Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker were not just yet. But the other thing I'll say too, and this echoes a little bit of what Matt LaFleur had said before the break, and it dovetails off of the point I just made. If and when, assuming the Packers are going to get Aaron Jones back at some point, we hope it's this week. Maybe it's not. Who knows? But Aaron Jones is not the cure-all, fix-all for everything, right? Because a lot of these things I was just talking about making the plays that are there to be made, those have nothing to do with Aaron Jones being absent from the ball game. Those are plays that other guys can make. And yes, Aaron Jones' reinsertion into this offense would be a huge boost. It will definitely help a lot of things. But the mentality for the players, and I know the coaches certainly have this mentality as well. It can't be that Aaron Jones is just going to fix everything, because this is the ultimate team sport, and the opportunities have been there for others as well.
100%. I mean, that was what ultimately you think about where guys have originally stepped up, and Christian Watson, where he made the most of his opportunities later in that season. Romeo Doubs stepping up early in the season when they didn't have Watson last year.
Right.
It's how guys establish themselves in these offenses. And, you go back to that final sequence, and not to put on any one specific player or any specific phase, but there were opportunities to catch the football. and they did not come up with them. So what ends up happening? Jordan Love has to do a little bit more heroics, and it leads to an interception in an end zone.
Yeah, he's put in a 3rd and 10 that, quite frankly, shouldn't have been 3rd and 10.
And look at the end of Tampa was not going to win the game, but look at the end of the Tampa game too, where when you're in 3rd and 10 and you're just taking streaks to the end zone and just shots to the end zone,
that's all you can do.
The probability is not going to be there.
Yeah. Well, I do need to take care of a little bit of sponsor business here. Wes, Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub-in-a-bowl Cousin Subs. 50 years of better. One other topic to get to before we go, we heard from a whole bunch of Packers assistant coaches on Monday after practice. We heard from the coordinators as well as the defensive assistants. Again, I'll just throw it out to you open-ended. Anything that came out of those media sessions that sort of struck a chord or stuck in your mind that you heard from one of the coaches about a particular player or something going on with the team right now?
First off, just to mention it because we just got done talking about it, but hearing Adam Stenovich's perspective on where Packers offensive coordinator Adam Stenovich, his perspective on where the offense is at right now after these 5 games. Nothing that you and I didn't already just discuss, but where the Packers need to get to, where the offensive line needs to get to, where the young nucleus around Jordan Love needs to produce, and ultimately just trying to get some win back in their sails. That's been a big line that I've been pushing at Inbox. I mean, I really think, you cannot take the Denver Broncos for granted whatsoever, but 5-1, 1-5, the Packers just need to get a win. They need to get that feeling of what it's like to win again. Because while the New Orleans win was great and it felt awesome in that 4th quarter, you remember what it looked like the first 3 quarters until you had that comeback. They got to go back to defeating an opponent again like they did against the Bears. I think that can be a huge thing for them. The other aspect of it actually goes over to Ryan Downer in the safety position because he was asked about Rudy Ford. And I thought Rudy, when we're talking about guys that have capitalized on their opportunities, Rudy's probably one of the best examples of that so far. A lot of questions for the Packers at the safety position. There was a wide open competition throughout the summer of who was going to line up next to Darnell Savage. Ford signed here after leaving Jacksonville last September. He signed here due in part to the opportunity he was hoping to get on defense. We all knew, everyone in the NFL saw what he could do as a gunner, as a coverage player. He wanted to be able to show that my skills on special teams can translate to defense.
Yeah.
And all the dude has done in that time since is take advantage of that. Hasn't been perfect, but when you look at the PFF staff right now that he's leading the league in run stops, he has 2 more interceptions after back-to-back games. Packers have needed somebody to provide a lift here defensively, and I don't think it was a coincidence that one of the better overall defensive performances Green Bay got this season came after Rudy Ford was able to capitalize on an interception. Hearing Downer talk about how this was a guy that has finally gotten his opportunity and capitalized on it, I think that is one of the when there's been injuries, when there's been opportunities, when you've looked for guys to step up, Rudy Ford has been one of those guys that I think has responded.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, and I had featured him in my what you might have missed with some video clips from the game against the Raiders. I thought, aside from getting the interception, I thought Ford played a really solid game, especially in the run support. The other thing that stood out to me, we heard it from a couple of the defensive coaches, is that, yes, of course, they want to get Devondre Campbell and Quay Walker back in the middle of the defense as soon as possible. But the defensive play did not take some huge step back with Isaiah McDuffie and Eric Wilson filling in at those inside linebacker spots. And I think that speaks to the preparation of those guys. Eric Wilson's he's a long time, relative to what's on this Packers roster. Yeah. He's a long-time veteran in this league. He's played a lot of football, and he just stepped in and did his thing out there. He's kind of an undersized, he's only about 230 pounds. He's not as, as big as a guy like Campbell or Walker, but he's certainly willing to throw his body around in there. And we've seen McDuffie making, the progression that he's made since he came here as a 6th-round pick out of Boston College. Packers want to get their starters back in there, but that defensive performance against the Raiders, it held up in large part because of those guys stepping in, and I think some credit is due there.
Says a lot about them too, if I may, just because arguably I think Quay has probably been their best all-around defensive player so far this season. I mean, the guy, he makes the tackles that are there, but he also, the way he's triggering this year is different, and the way he's collapsing on the line of scrimmage. You take that out of the defense in that second half, I had real questions about what was going to happen with Josh Jacobs. But outside of just that 124-yard run to the edge, Green Bay still bottled that up, and I thought that was a big credit to Wilson and McNabb.
Yeah, I may quibble with you a little bit, not to take anything away from Walker, but if I were to pick a defensive MVP through the first 5 games, I might have to say Rasul Douglas. And I know that he gave up the touchdown against the Lions when he got fooled, and then there was the whole conversation after the game about, hey, we planned that just for you. We knew you were going to bite on this move, whatever. Hey, that happens. That's the cat and mouse game that's played in the NFL. Rasul Douglas, to me, has he was kind of that turnover machine in some respects in 2021 when he first got here and was thrown into things, and he was making getting these key interceptions. Then he settled in, did his thing last year, but it feels like he is almost a different player this year than he was last year. There's something about his approach, his swagger, just his attitude, whatever you want to call it, that he looks a little bit different. Maybe he's just that much more comfortable in this defense now that he's had a couple of training camps and all that to get ready. But really like what Rasul Douglas has done.
And he was back outside. I mean, he spent the offseason outside too.
Yeah, that's true. Last year there was a lot of experimentation going on with where he was lining up. I
respected what the idea was there, because you look at him, he has a similar size to a Charles Woodson. There was that comparison, I think, that Aaron Rodgers threw out there at the time, but the way he battles and the way he uses his size on the perimeter, that is where I think he's really shown his growth. And honestly, it'd be really interesting if you just broke out his play in the number of snaps he's taken just at the perimeter cornerback spot. The Packers made a pretty gutsy call there. They're going to say, hey, we're going to play sides. We're going to have Jair on the left. We're going to play Rasul on the right, understanding that you're going to see a lot of Devontae over there. And I thought he really competed well against him. A guy that it's a high wire act going against Devontae.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I thought he really succeeded.
Yeah, well, the Packers defense certainly has something to build off of heading into the Denver game. The Packers offense trying to get things untracked early in games, like we had talked about earlier. We'll talk a little bit more about the Denver Broncos on our next show leading into Sunday's game. But for now, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage on the team on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.